Husbands of Bridezillas, how did you handle your wife's attitude on your wedding day and did it change your image of her? Also, how bad was she? My wife was extremely cranky and yelling at everyone all day because things weren't perfect. The funny thing is, her behavior was causing a lot of stuff to not be perfect. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she threw a beer bottle at the DJ's head when he turned on a song she didn't like. Our marriage only lasted a year. At least in your wedding day all assault charges are forgiven. Was actually interviewed for the show Bridezillas. I said I wouldn't get married if we were on that show. Anyway, she was the same during the marriage. It was a typical bad marriage because of finances. She was a spendthrift and living that way just causes much suffering. We had an expensive wedding that I'm still paying for. Wow, until your comment I always thought spendthrift meant someone who was thrifty, but it's the opposite. Interesting. I was a Groomzilla for 30 seconds. DJ was supposed to play us out to This Is Us by Mark Knopfler and Emmylou Harris. Awesome song. Instead he played us out to This Is Us by One Direction. I was pee for a moment but only my bride and the maid of honor noticed and they both knew how we both agonized over song choice just to see it go wrong. Oh well, on with the show. Slightly related funny story. My husband and mother-in-law were supposed to dance to Rainbow Connection by Kenny Loggins. What they ended up dancing to was Rainbow Connection by Kermit the Frog. It was a hilarious mistake. So one thing I've noticed, it's not the fiance that usually notices it. They just see it as stress from the planning. They usually think, she just wants a perfect day. Why is everyone else being an butthole about it? The people that will see the person as the Bridezilla is usually her bridesmaids first. This will be followed by the wedding vendors. If it is bad, the family will see it along with the rest of the wedding party. The soon-to-be husband is the last to see this as he is usually shielded from it by friends and family unless it gets totally out of control. My ex-fiancé called me a Bridezilla when I would ask his opinion on what he preferred. I'm not a great planner and planning a wedding all alone was hard. It was even harder when he would tell me to shut up about it when I would ask what he would prefer. I can't remember exactly what the thing was, but one day he told me he hated something I had chosen and couldn't believe I would do that. He was actually angry. Like, dude, if you had shared your opinion instead of telling me to shut up when I asked, this wouldn't be an issue. He's an ex for a reason. But being called a Bridezilla was hurtful because I was trying so hard to make everybody happy, especially him. I realize now I wasn't being a Bridezilla at all, but he had me convinced I was some kind of monster. Lucky dodging that bullet. Anyone who actively tries to make you hate yourself is abusive and shouldn't be in your life. I was called a Bridezilla by a few relatives because I was one. Angry the cake I paid $200 was bland and the wrong color when I could have got exactly what I wanted at Publix for half that. I was guilted into letting a friend of my grandma make the cake. 2 did not want my abusive father's side of the family there because my aunt is a narcissistic attention W who tried to make my baby cousin steal my bouquet and told her other granddaughter to throw ink on my dress. Which she did, so there's now a permanent purple stain the size of a cantaloupe on my dress. And told her other granddaughter to throw ink on my dress. Which she did, so there's now a permanent purple stain the size of a cantaloupe on my dress. It seems like wedding day stress could be used to build a fairly effective temporary insanity defense. Not the husband. Accused Bridezilla. I've got 3 sisters. We created a rotation for maid of honor. My sister that was mine asked that she be the only one in a long dress. Bridesmaid wise. Sure. Outdoor June wedding. Others can wear knee length. Older sister complains about having to show her legs. She complains about everything. I start to cave and say, well, maybe all my sisters can wear long. Number. My mom and other sister say this is not okay to be bullied. Older sister complains about having to wear a dress period. Told her I was fine with a lady's suit. I want her to feel pretty too. Apparently this all made me a Bridezilla in her eyes. It is still mentioned by her sporadically. Maid of honor sister shuts it down quickly. And I cried over wedding stamps to my mom because I thought the wax seal would make them too heavy for regular stamps. Not a Bridezilla, but my mother-in-law was at my own wedding. She wanted to wear the same dress as me. Didn't want to pay for any of my guests to have dinner. My in-laws are very well off and were paying for majority of the wedding. My parents gave their life savings to save face and they didn't even cover 1/10th of the total cost of the wedding, and designed the wedding invitations with her and her husband's entire family, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children, grandchildren, and my parents' names were tiny at the bottom of the page. I had to have invitations reprinted for my guests in secret. Whenever she didn't get what she wanted, she would convince everyone my mother was a manipulative beat trying to ruin everything and my mother-in-law was just trying her best. When the truth is I wanted to be as far away from that wedding and that woman as much as possible and tried to keep my mum away from her too. She found and read my diary and used it to convince her husband I was a bratty psychopath. She pushed everyone to breaking point and knew she'd be safe because we all nodded along not wanting to rock the boat. She affected her marriage and my marriage. I literally restarted therapy just because of this woman. I've been married a year and I'm still trying to run away from her. We live very nearby and every weekend we are inundated with calls and texts crying about how we never see her and she's a victim of some new thing every week. My husband is interviewing for jobs abroad and I'm trying to make an escape plan with my business so I can up and go at a moment's notice. This bee needs to sit back down. I was the bride in this situation. My fiance is a wonderful man, but terrible with organization and planning, and there's no way we could afford a wedding planner. Trying to afford even the most budget-friendly wedding in a major city means a lot of price comparisons, bargaining with vendors, and keeping track of tiny details. I honestly never cared that much about my wedding, only that it was outside, had good food and alcohol, and wasn't that expensive. But even that required hours of my time and energy and left me exhausted and frustrated. My fiance did everything he could to help, but it's simply not his skill set, and his help often turned out to be more of a hindrance than anything. I started to notice how irritable and frustrated I was anytime we talked about the wedding. I was picking arguments everything my fiance mentioned anything because his comments would be so basic. Hey babe, we should totally have steak for the dinner. Sure babe. I'll just completely replan the menu. I spent a month arguing with the caterer over trying to get it to cost less than $7,000 for 50 people. Dress shopping was a nightmare. I'm mildly overweight, maybe 20-30 pounds over what I should be, but slowly working on it, and the whole experience made me feel like a whale who didn't even deserve to be married. I went home and freaked out and told him I hated our wedding and couldn't we just forget the whole thing. So we cancelled our wedding and next May we'll be flying to Italy with just our parents and siblings and getting married in a villa in Tuscany. 2 weeks in Europe will be half the price of a cheap state park wedding for 50 people in this city. Best decision we ever made. Outside, had good food and alcohol, and wasn't that expensive. Pick 2. So many people are replying how they went to a public park and had someone else provide crap. That is out of the context of this. If someone else is providing say a dance floor, they are covering an expense you don't have to. This only applies if you are covering the entire expense yourself. Wedding photographer here, who also planned a wedding at one point. Honestly, 95% of stressed out brides are that way because either their fiancé is entirely unhelpful, doesn't care about the wedding, or their mom is giving them grief. I can say as a photographer, I have more issues with moms than with brides, and as a former bride, I can say that I was ready to wring my own mother's neck. So, as a fellow photographer here, I can 100% agree with this. It's super but rare for brides to be complete B. It's always the mom driving the bride up a wall. As if any husband is going to come on here and be like, yeah, my wife was freaking insane that day and I was just holding on for dear life. All such posts will no doubt start with "this is a throwaway account, because I'm a dead man if my wife ever finds out I said this." Groomzilla here, wedding in 3 days. Can barely muster excitement or happiness after a 2-year engagement while simultaneously worrying about costs, honeymoon travel, and an untrustworthy bridal party. Feel like I'm on a razor's edge and the first thing to not go according to plan, I swear to Jesus I'm going to snap. I'm the bride. My mother and matron of honor were the zealous, who drove me up the wall with "you should do this, but don't forget to do that, and you can't do this, but you must do that, oh and you should have this and that, and the other, is trying to be too detailed, etc. My husband listened to my frustration for all of one day and said, "We can elope, we can get married at town hall and have the reception another day, or you can let them drive us both crazy, you pick." We got married 2 months later at town hall, with about 20 of our closest friends and family in attendance, and had a nice lunch at a nice restaurant immediately afterwards, and had the reception 4 months after at the local VFW for super cheap. And everyone had such a great time that they're still taking about the fun, the food, and the decor. 2 years later. My husband was somewhat of a husbandzilla. I felt like our wedding was just a big competition to him to outdo his 3 elder brothers' weddings. I wanted to just get married at the courthouse and he was aware of that, yet every time I expressed that I didn't have an opinion on what kind of silverware I wanted, or what I wanted the invitation to look like, I got a long speech about how I didn't care about our wedding and blah blah blah. Then I was dumb and told him that I literally couldn't care less about this wedding because it was a waste of money and time and we could already be married if we would just go to the courthouse. Anyway, we talked about it in counseling, so he chilled out after that. My wife was getting stressed and started to zill out, so I took it away from her. We sat down over dinner one night and discussed what her most important moments or ideas were, and she agreed as long as those 3-4 items were covered, she would relax and let me fill in the blanks. You want a venue that will let you make a runner out of silk scarves and do a Sunday afternoon ceremony? Great. Here are the 2 in our area that do that. Chicken, fish, or beef? Okay. Here are the 2 chicken entries they serve that you would like. No, you can't see the price. I will take care of that. Here are the 3 photography studios that work with our DJ for the video sound and the venue. No, that other guy you saw on Facebook is not as good. Please review these 3 and choose your photographer. Here is station identification, the one DJ you can choose from. Seriously, I didn't even give her an option on this one. If you are getting married in Southern California, this is the only one to use. They do way more than just play music, and having a professional to direct your guests' attention makes the entire event so much better. Over 2 years later and we still have people telling us how well everything went at our wedding. Why the obsession with Bridezillas sucks. Let's make a totally inexperienced party planner host a huge fancy party with a million moving parts she has to figure out on her own. Also, her family is up her butt and throw an intense societal pressure. When she cracks under pressure, we'll be mean and judgmental. I am a chill person and wanted a simple wedding, and planning it still sucked butt. My wife didn't go full on Bridezilla, but it was definitely pretty clear that the stress was getting to her. All the Instagram browsing, wedding magazine reading, and YouTube watching she was doing had created a set of extremely unrealistic expectations. Certain things got so built up in her head that when the reality didn't match up, it was hard for her not to feel a bit let down. And for me, it was hard to hear her talk about how much she hated her dress, our venue, the decorations, etc., and how terrible and gaudy and disappointing our wedding was going to be. I found that we were fighting a lot more frequently, too, which really made me start to worry that this was a red flag until I googled fighting before the wedding and found out what a common thing it was. Ultimately, I'd say it was an overall positive experience because I got to see her pull herself back from the edge of being a Bridezilla and use her intelligence and reason to control her emotions. It gave me even more confidence in the future of our relationship because I could see that when difficult times or hard emotions come, she's willing to talk through them and recognize that her feelings might not reflect the truth of the situation. I'd probably have a much different response if instead of sobbing quietly to me privately she threw a big public screaming fit like a full-on Bridezilla, but as it is, I think it wound up okay. I had a moment of being one. I needed these signs printed and they came out too big, so I ordered new ones and paid a ton for rush shipping. 2 days later, no update. I call and they say they will get on it. Next day, no update, and my wedding was in 2 days. There was my moment. That poor person did not deserve my stressed out ranting. I'm glad I didn't yell, but I am sure she hung up and said, wow, what a bee, somehow my order was misfiled, so they rush printed it and shipped overnight. I don't know. Those 2 mistakes on their part warrant at least a stern talking to. First, they mess up your order. Then, while they know they're late and it's their fault, they misplace the order. Seems like a situation in which you were justified to be pissed off. was the best man for a Bridezilla wedding, and we really thought the groom was going to call it off because of her antics that day and previously. We found out she had a secondary guest list that included more of her folks and less of his folks about a week before, and the stress of getting his folks there almost killed him. It was finally a combination of her mother and his mother alone in a room with her hours before the ceremony that scared her straight. She was not a spoiled girl, but she had fully bought into the today is your day mindset and didn't actually take the pushback from anyone seriously. Dang. When the mother and mother-in-law to be agree the bride needs to step back and chill the frick out, the bear's listening too. I'm not the husband, but my mom was terrible. She threatened to stop paying for the wedding if we didn't follow her advice with photos, wedding colors, invites, who gets invited, location, food, etc. She then got upset and cried on the phone when we jointly told her to stop being too pushy. My only Bridezilla moment was while we're waiting for everyone to start walking down the aisle. The song started playing and then another guest showed up, so they saw us all. Everyone hesitated and I told them to freaking move or the song would end before I got down the aisle. My blood is boiling for you. I would have been livid. Paid for a pretty tiny wedding with a settlement from my own mother's passing. Planned the wedding in the course of like 2 months and decided I cared more about the people than the fancy-ness. While I was emotional here or there, it was more over both my parents having passed and not being with us. Crap sucked and I stopped caring about spending a crap ton of money and strict tradition when I realized my dad would be there to walk me down the aisle or my mom to help me get in my dress. My wife was really chill about the whole thing, honestly, but is there a term for future Milzilla? Cause we had that, which was too bad because she isn't usually that way in life, and for years it colored the way my family viewed her. Just normal. I'm getting married this Saturday, and thanking my lucky stars that my fiancé has been surprisingly easygoing this whole process. It helps that we've both done theater for a long time, so stressful weeks leading into an opening night is not all that unusual for us. Groomzilla here. We did a costume wedding, and the day of the wedding our seamstress was hit by a bus and none of the 16 outfits were ready. The maid of honor rushed to the seamstress's house to pick we could. None of the outfits were ready, and the seamstress was watching Netflix on her couch. Maybe it was a tiny bus. I called my best man, explained the situation, and told them to skip breakfast and get over here ASAP. 45 minutes later, I called again only to find they were at IHOP waiting on food. I lost my freaking crap at that point, considering we were in crisis mode and they were scarfing down pancakes. Years later I feel pretty justified, but I wish I hadn't lost my cool. Lots of yelling and screaming. As for the wedding, the bridesmaids spent the entire morning afternoon sewing on buttons and fixing the stuff the seamstress missed. The guys' costumes were fixed up, but the girls ended up renting outfits from a local costume shop last minute. They all looked like Disney princesses and it was wonderful, so no harm no foul I guess. And as for the seamstress, she never called us back to collect on her invoice. Maybe she was hit by a bus. Whoa, can't say I see her staying in business long if that's her idea of professional. My ex-wife was a Bridezilla and her mother was the definition of a monster-in-law. I just handed over reins in defeat and got drunk stoned through the whole planning process. Ended up being the complete opposite of anything that I wanted. The marriage lasted 2 years, 7 months and 3 days. My group of friends, including my best man, his now wife, a few colleagues, my sister, and her husband, had a betting pool on how long the marriage will last. I found this out the day I told my father, who was in on it, that we had separated. At the time I put it down to the stress of wedding planning and thought, no, she's not really like this. Nope, turns out that she is a spoiltsy and wanted me to take over from her father, just pampering her and never saying no because he stated that now she was married it was my responsibility to keep her in the life she used to. She ended up leaving me while I was deployed and moving interstate, taking my son. That was a shock to come home to an empty house. Her reasoning: I said no to her buying a new vacuum and that I didn't love my family enough because I put my work first. After she left I said frick it and became a man W, as that relationship was dead to me. 4 years later, after a long and messy divorce, I am about to elope to Vegas with my partner as we are happier than ever together, and neither of us want to deal with the BS associated with a traditional wedding. Not a husband, but I know a Bridezilla. I was supposed to go dress shopping with the bride, but she went without me. Fine. It took 2 months for her to tell me what color I should wear. I get to the wedding and I'm changing there and realize that I wasn't invited to anything or included in anything, including the hair and makeup that was provided for the wedding party. I also realized that the bride's mother was wearing the same color dress as the bridesmaids. Mine was a totally different color that matched nothing in the wedding. I was told to wear that color. Oh yeah, I'm the mother of the groom. I had gotten my hair done by my stylist beforehand and ironically, I knew the makeup artist that was hired. I'd done my own and she touched it up a little bit because we used to be co-workers and she felt bad. I wanted to cry. My feelings were so hurt. I thought we had a pretty good relationship, but I was so wrong. The wedding was fun. The bride hid in her dressing room the whole night. Came out to get married, then went back in. Came out for pics. Went back in. Came out for dinner but was so late. Everyone had already eaten. She did the traditional dances. Went back in and didn't come back out until everyone had left. My son got to entertain everyone. Why? Because she bought a very form-fitting dress a year before the wedding and then gained a bit of weight. Couldn't afford a new dress, so had to pay to add fabric to the one she had. She thought she looked bad. She didn't, so she hid. If anyone went in to try to talk her off the ledge, she threw a fit and cried. When she was introduced to her husband's relatives she'd never met, she was indifferent and rude. The groom had no idea any of this was going on. She had told him she felt sick. Good times. I should also mention that they had been married for 2 years, but she wanted the big splashy wedding and then didn't participate in it. My friend of 10 years wasn't a screaming Bridezilla in public, but she was controlling. So controlling that the bridesmaids and groomsmen got together just to be about her for about 5 minutes. The best man complained about how he hated the costume suit he was wearing, and how we never got to choose. I voiced up in a private email and the bride got on my case about it, then attacked my character because I wasn't capitulating to her every desire. I then told her I'm sorry, you don't see how controlling you are. That's the bigger issue. I ditched her and our friendship and I'm so much happier. I'll pop in and admit that I was the Bridezilla. I'm normally super calm in stressful situations, but planning a traditional wedding on a tight budget, fully funded by me, is awful, especially because it's so many months of constant effort. My now husband had no interest in any of the wedding coordination. Whenever I asked for help or input, he'd just respond, "This is usually a woman's thing, so I don't know how, don't want to do it." I would have leaned on my bridesmaids, but my maid of honor passed away before the wedding and my other bridesmaids all moved out of state a few months before the wedding. Finances were really tough because my car's transmission died a few months before the wedding and now husband and I had to share a car even though we worked 20 miles apart in opposite directions from home. Also ended up with a surprise massive student loan situation. That a whole other story. The week before the wedding, I came down with pneumonia and basically snapped. I screamed and yelled at everyone, nearly called things off. I was so stressed out and frustrated. Fortunately, the small sane part of me prevailed and I married the best and most supportive partner I could hope for. Learned that while he's not so great at organizing and planning, he is great at getting us through hard times by being emotional support and picking up the home life slack when I have to focus on handling major events. Our marriage has been fantastic, and the Bridezilla only lasted for a short bit. I was at my cousin's wedding in Long Island. Beautiful church and the reception was at a gorgeous country club that you could see the beach from. My aunt, bride's mom, at one point tells my mom that this is a day of heck. Didn't make sense at all. The reception was a blast and went off without a hitch. Only thing that maybe was wrong was the DJ said put your hands in the air way too much. How could you say that about your daughter's wedding? Apparently, and surprisingly, the reception venue was reasonably priced as was the catering. Food was excellent and there was an open bar. What's not to like? I think something that people need to remember about Bridezillas is the situation that they're in. Our society puts a lot of pressure on brides as far as what their wedding should be. From the moment they read their first fairy tale until they send out the last thank you card, a bride is bombarded by expectations of what the perfect wedding is. Once the ring is on, that pressure is increased 1,000-fold by friends, family, co-workers, vendors, everyone and their dog. It doesn't help that weddings are wildly more expensive than they used to be, and up until very recently, a bride was basically forced to rely on her family for the money for this, which they felt entitled them to a say on how the day went. Compounding this is the pressure from the vendors. Directly, this idea that if you do less you're selling yourself short, and a lot of brides are not used to this kind of pressure. Then mom swoops in and says you should do what she wants anyway, and so the bride signs on the dotted line for something she doesn't want because the pressure is strong and she doesn't want others to be unhappy. Then you reach a breaking point, something important to the bride, and she puts her foot down. Instantly, that pressure turns venomous, and people start throwing accusations at the bride that she's selfish. Add in a healthy mix of the groom wafting about saying whatever makes you happy and my mom is upset because you. Insert some wedding decision here. A nasty Facebook post from a cousin because a bride wouldn't let her invite her boyfriend of 2 weeks. Your aunt being peeved because the wedding isn't a GMO-free raw food vegan affair. And everyone expecting that you should put their wants over the needs of others. And a lot of people aren't used to this kind of pressure snap. Then the word Bridezilla is thrown around while the bride is overcome with guilt for losing her temper. There are actual Bridezillas out there, don't get me wrong. But for every real Bridezilla, there are 10 women at the end of their rope without support. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.